The snow came early that year, falling in thick, hushed sheets that muffled the world into silence. It blanketed the high plains of Montana Territory in white, softening the sharp edges of broken fences and rusted tools left out in the open. Beneath the aspen trees, deer moved like ghosts, and somewhere out near the Blacktail Creek, a lone wolf raised its muzzle to the bruised sky and howled. Silas Rourke heard that howl from his cabin porch, a matchstick glowing between his lips. He didn't flinch, didn't shift a muscle, even though the sound curled down his spine like an old warning. He'd grown used to the lonely language of the wilderness. The creak of ice forming in the eaves, the snap of pine wood in the stove, the far-off crack of something dying in the snow. Out here, alone for near 5 winters now, silence was a companion and fear a habit long buried. His land stretched rough and raw to the east, where the hills caught fire every morning with the sunrise. He worked it alone, tending cattle that never fattened quite right, mending what could be mended, and burying what couldn't. There been no one to answer to since the war ended, and he'd come west with a letter and nothing else. Just the memory of a brother who never came home and a woman he couldn't stay with, not after what he'd seen. He wasn't a man given to prayer or want. He kept to himself, kept his head down, and drank only when the moon was full and the ache in his chest got too loud. Folks in town called him strange, said he carried ghosts. He didn't deny it. He just kept riding that same trail between his cabin and the high ridge where he could see clear to the Bitterroots on a good day. But something changed the morning he found her tracks. They weren't the clean, pointed hoofprints of deer or the heavy circles of elk. These were smaller, human, barefoot, even in the snow and weaving, staggered like someone half lost or running. Silas dismounted slow, crouched beside them. The snow was fresh, the prints no more than a few hours old, toes pressed deep. No boots, no horse, just one set of feet carving a jagged path from the timberline down toward the creek. He stood for a long moment, watching the wind erase the edges. By rights, he should have turned back. This wasn't his concern. Folks went missing out here all the time, and sometimes that was the point. He didn't rescue people, not anymore. He didn't chase down shadows, but his horse shifted beside him, uneasy, and something tightened in his gut, sharp and persistent. Like a splinter that wouldn't work its way free, he followed. The prince led him down through the bracken and brush, over frozen roots and into the thicker woods. He found bits of torn fabric snagged on branches, gray linen, worn thin. Blood, too, bright against the snow in pinprick drops. She was hurt or scared, maybe both. The trail bent sharply near the creek, doubled back, then veered uphill again. By the time he saw her, the light was failing. She was crouched beneath a bent cottonwood, hair wild as the wind, tangled and dark with twigs. She turned toward him when he stepped into view, and for one stark second, Silas thought of a doe caught in a snare. Eyes wide, chest heaving, skin too pale. Her hands were red and raw, knuckles split. She wore a torn shift, no coat. No shoes. She was not of this place, not dressed for it, and yet she didn't beg or cry or plead. She looked at him like he was the one in danger, and then she ran. Silas cursed low, heart lurching as she stumbled through the drifts. He could have let her go, should have, but he didn't. He gave chase, closing the distance with long strides, catching her by the elbow before she slipped on the rocks. She twisted, feral, striking out. Her nails caught his cheek, and blood bloomed warm against the cold. "Easy," he said, gripping tighter. "I'm not here to hurt you." Her mouth moved, but no words came, just ragged breath. Her knees gave way. Silas caught her before she fell. She weighed near nothing, just bones and frost and terror. He wrapped her in his coat, pressed her to his chest, and felt the shiver that racked her body. She didn't fight anymore, didn't speak. Just clung to his shirt front like the world might vanish if she let go. In the days to come, he'd ask himself why he brought her back, why he didn't leave her where she lay. He'd tell himself it was the cold or the blood or that look in her eyes, but deep down he knew better. He'd seen something in her, something wild, something wounded, and something that looked a whole lot like hope. She didn't speak for 3 days. Not once, not even when he laid warm broth by her bed or when the fever broke, and she gasped like someone rising from deep water. Silas didn't press. He wasn't the asking kind. He just kept the fire stoked and boiled water to bathe her cracked hands, then turned away when she flinched from his touch. She slept light and restless. Sometimes she woke in a sweat, fists clenched, eyes darting around the small cabin like she didn't know where she was. He heard her rise at night, pacing soft across the floorboards, pausing near the door but never opening it. Like some part of her was still deciding whether to run or stay. She wasn't built for the cold, that much was clear. Her feet had gone nearly blue when he found her. He'd wrapped them in wool and prayed she wouldn't lose her toes. So far, she hadn't, but the skin peeled and she hissed when he changed the bandages. Her arms were dotted with bruises, and there was a cut along her rib cage that looked weeks old, half-healed wrong. Still, there was no ring on her hand, no papers, nothing to say where she came from or who might come looking. She sat by the hearth on the fourth morning, legs tucked under a quilt, her hair combed back tight. Silas had left a brush on the table without thinking. She must have found it in the night. It changed her just a little, made her look less like a cornered thing and more like someone who used to know her own name. "You're not afraid of me," she said, sudden and hoarse. Silas, hunched over the woodpile near the stove, looked up slow. Her voice was softer than he expected, but there was no apology in it, just observation. "No," he said. She studied him. Her eyes were dark, maybe brown, maybe black, and hard to read. "You should be." He didn't answer that, didn't know how. Instead, he offered her a tin cup of hot coffee. She took it with both hands and didn't look away. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. Then, quiet as the wind outside, she said, "Marin." It hung there between them. A single word, but it rooted in the air like something weighty. Silas gave a slight nod and turned back to the fire, feeding it another log. "Marin," he repeated under his breath, like a prayer or a promise. Later that day, he caught her standing by the window, looking out at the trees. Snow still coated the earth like a second skin, but the light had softened. The thaw would come soon. She watched the ridgeline like it held some secret answer, her fingers curled against the glass. "There's someone chassin' you?" he asked, not turning from where he skinned a rabbit at the table. She didn't flinch, didn't lie either. "Yes." "Lawmans." "No." "Then I reckon they don't get to find you, unless you want 'em to." She looked over her shoulder. The light hit her cheek just right, and Silas saw the outline of a scar that ran from her temple to her jaw, thin, old, faded, but deep enough that it must have hurt like hell once. She noticed him looking, didn't hide it. "What kind of man are you?" she asked, not like a challenge, but like she truly wanted to know. Silas paused, knife still in hand. He considered the blood on his knuckles, the loneliness in his bones, the weight he carried quiet in the cage of his chest. "Just one who keeps to himself," he said. "Doesn't mean I don't care who crosses my doorstep." She nodded slow, then turned back to the window. That night she ate more than she had before, asked him where the nearest creek was, and offered to help mend the fence when the thaw came. Silas didn't argue. He just handed her another slice of bread and poured her another cup of coffee. He didn't ask what she'd done. Didn't need to. He'd seen enough of the world to know that fear and guilt wear the same face, and sometimes running wasn't about hiding, it was about surviving. The wind howled outside like it wanted to pull the walls apart. Inside, the fire cracked and shadows danced on the beams above their heads. She sat cross-legged on the floor, braiding strips of old cloth into rope, her hands steady now. Silas watched her from his chair, quiet. She was the wild thing he should have feared. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was waiting to be left behind. Spring came like a breath held too long, then released all at once. The snow withdrew in rivulets, feeding the earth, and with it came color, the first stubborn crocus pushing through thawed soil, the soft yellow of willow catkins brushing the banks of the creek. Days stretched longer, slower. The air lost its bite. Marin shed the cabin's hush like a worn coat. She was up before the sun most mornings, sleeves rolled, chin set, moving with a quiet purpose that never quite gave away her thoughts. She patched the roof with tar and bark while Silas braced the ladder below. She cleared the stables, fed the mule, gathered eggs from a half-wild clutch of hens he'd forgotten he owned. She never asked how long she might stay, and he never offered a reason for her to leave. They worked side by side more often than not, speaking little. There was a rhythm to it, an understanding that needed no words. Marin never asked for his story, and Silas in turn didn't push for hers. Still, questions hung in the air like wood smoke, unspoken, waiting. One morning she came in from the field, apron damp, cheeks flushed with the wind, and he noticed she no longer moved like someone expecting a blow. Her shoulders didn't flinch at sudden sound. Her eyes weren't always scanning the tree line. She laughed once when the mule kicked over a bucket. It caught him off guard, that sound. Unpracticed, raw, but real. Later, by firelight, she sat with her knees drawn up and a carved piece of wood in her lap. She'd taken to whittling odd shapes, mostly birds, sometimes horses. Tonight it was a fox, the curl of its tail coming to life beneath her blade. "You ever kill a man?" she asked without looking up. Silas didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, thumb running along the curve of his tin cup. "Yes," he said. She nodded like she already knew. "Did he deserve it?" Silas looked at her then, really looked. The firelight caught the gold in her eyes, revealed the fine tremor in her fingers. She wasn't asking to judge him. She was asking to measure something inside herself. "Some did," he said. "Some I still ain't sure." She set the fox down gently on the table. "I killed mine," she said, "the man that hurt me." The fire snapped. Outside, wind rustled the eaves soft and steady. Silas didn't speak, didn't shift, just waited. She picked at the hem of her sleeve. "He wasn't the first who tried, but he was the last. I ran after. Didn't stop running for near a year. Figured I'd die somewhere cold enough to erase me." "You didn't," he said. "No," she met his gaze. "But it was close." They sat with that a while. He poured another inch of coffee into her cup, and she accepted it like it meant something. Maybe it did. The next week, they rode into town together for supplies. It was Marin's first time off the land since he found her. She wore a scarf low over her brow and kept to his shadow, but her posture was steady, her mouth set with quiet resolve. At the mercantile, the shopkeep eyed her with curiosity but said nothing. Folks still gave Silas a wide berth. His name had long since earned him that. Rumors clung to him like dust, and Marin, for all her silence, was just another shadow to fold into the myth. They were loading flour and nails into the wagon when the sheriff appeared. "Rurk," he said, squinting under the brim of his hat. "Didn't expect to see you off the ridge." "Needed beans," Silas said, without turning. The sheriff's eyes flicked to Marin. "She yours?" Silas didn't answer. Marin lifted her chin. The sheriff nodded, slow. "If she's running from something, you'd best make sure it don't find her here. This town don't need more trouble." "Then it's a good thing we're not staying," Marin said, voice calm and low. They rode back in silence, wagon wheels creaking beneath the weight. Silas glanced at her once, saw the way her hand stayed close to the knife tucked in her coat. Not fear, readiness. At the creek that night, she stood with her boots in the water, skirts hitched, eyes on the current. "I'm not afraid of dying," she said. "I just don't want it to be meaningless." "It wouldn't be," he said. "You don't know that." "I know you," he said. "More than you think." She looked at him long and steady. In the space between those words, something shifted. Not loud, not grand, but sure, like the turning of a tide. The heat came sudden all at once, like the land was catching its breath. The grass thickened in the hollows, green and unruly. Birds nested in the rafters of the barn, bold and noisy. Wildflowers tangled along the fence lines, careless in their beauty. It was a season that invited forgetting, of frostbite, of scars, of what came before. But forgetting wasn't something Marin allowed herself. Each day she rose early and worked hard, and when her hands were idle, her mind was not. Silas noticed it in the way she stared into the trees some evenings, like waiting for something to step out of them. Her jaw set, her breath shallow, but she never spoke of it again, the man she killed, the years spent running. He didn't push. But he saw. She took to riding the ridge in the afternoons, bareback on his old gelding, legs tucked close, her silhouette lean and sure against the sky. He watched her from the field one evening, a faint ache blooming in his chest. Not desire, not quite, something older, quieter, like belonging or the memory of a song he once knew. That night a storm broke. It came in hard and fast, lightning streaking the sky like cracked glass. Rain lashed the cabin roof, and the wind pressed against the walls like fists. Silas barred the door and stoked the fire high. Marin stood near the hearth, arms crossed tight over her ribs, flinching each time thunder cracked. "Storms bother you?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. No, she said finally, not the storm itself, just what comes after. He didn't ask her to explain. He just set a second mug of coffee by her elbow and moved a chair closer to the fire. They sat through the worst of it in silence, watching shadows stretch across the walls. Near midnight, the wind howled low, and Marin stood, barefoot, pacing the floor with an urgency she couldn't disguise. He had dogs, she said, voice thin. I still hear them sometimes, when it rains. Silas said nothing, just waited. He kept them in cages, starved, turned them loose when he was angry, which was most of the time. He didn't reach for her, didn't offer comfort in the usual way. But his voice, when it came, was steady. There ain't any dogs here, nothing coming through that storm but rain. She closed her eyes. I know, but I still wait for it. In the hush that followed, he moved to the woodpile, drew a heavy blanket over her shoulders. You don't have to be the one always ready, he said. Not here. She looked at him like she didn't know what to do with that. Then, for the first time, she leaned in. Not fully, not with abandon, just enough that her shoulder brushed his. He didn't move away. The storm passed before dawn. The world outside gleamed with the freshness of things made clean, and for a little while they let themselves believe that maybe the worst had already come. But signs began to gather. A saddle torn and left hanging on the far fence, bootprints in the mud that didn't match either of theirs, a hawk nailed to a post, wings spread, blood soaking the wood. Silas saw the tension return to Marin like a tide rising in her bones. She didn't speak of it, didn't have to. Could be drifters, he said, more to hear it aloud than to believe it. Or a message, she replied. He didn't ask from whom. 2 nights later, he woke to find her gone. The door stood open, swinging in the wind. Panic, sharp and unfamiliar, clenched his chest. He found her at the creek, knife in hand, eyes scanning the woods. I heard something, she said. Voices, maybe only one. Silas listened. Nothing but crickets and water. We need to be ready, she said. He nodded. We are. They didn't sleep that night. By morning it was clear. Whatever Marin had fled from, it had found her again. The land changed when danger returned. It grew quiet, too quiet, birds nesting deeper, rabbits scarce, even the wind moving with purpose. Marin felt it first, like a chill beneath her ribs. She didn't speak of fear, only sharpened her knife and started laying traps near the perimeter, her boots treading paths like she was preparing for siege. Silas boarded the windows and checked his rifle twice a day. He reinforced the barn door and moved their stores into the cellar, muscle memory, guiding every movement. He'd known war once, and though this was different, the waiting felt the same. Still, they didn't live like ghosts. They cooked together, split wood, traded watch shifts. Marin spoke more in those days, small things, like the name of her sister, long dead, or the time she once rode a freight train all the way to Denver and watched a snowfall from the roof of a boxcar. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in rust and gold, Silas found her sitting cross-legged on the roof of the cabin, her figure silhouetted against the light. She had the look of someone searching for signs, reading the horizon like scripture. Anything? He asked from the ladder. She shook her head. Not yet. He climbed up beside her. The silence between them was soft, companionable. He was a bounty hunter, she said after a while. Not by trade, not really. But someone offered money, and he needed blood more than bread. Silas listened. I was staying at a mission in Idaho, she went on, sleeping in the loft, helping with the kitchens. I thought I was safe. Then one night he came with 2 men, said I was wanted for murder. No warrant, just coin. What did you do? I set fire to the chapel, she said, slowed them down, took a horse and ran. I didn't know where else to go. She looked at him then, waiting for judgment. He just said, you did what you had to. That night she crept into his room without a word and slid beneath the covers beside him. Her body was cold, tense. But she didn't tremble. She just lay there breathing, and he let her be. They didn't speak, didn't touch beyond the press of their shoulders, but something in the dark settled. They stayed like that until first light. 2 days later the trapline was sprung. Silas found the man just past the ravine, one leg twisted in iron, a pistol inches from his fingers. Blood stained his pants, but his eyes were clear, full of hate and something colder, certainty. You him, the man rasped. Who's asking? Silas said, already knowing. The man smirked. She's worth more than you think. Silas stepped on the gun and kicked it back. She's not for sale. She'd kill your family yet. That earned him a rifle butt to the temple. He slumped unconscious. Silas tied him up tight and dragged him back through the trees. Marin was waiting by the barn. She didn't blink when she saw him. "Do you know him?" Silas asked. "No. But I know who sent him." They kept him in the cellar, fed him, barely. Marin questioned him that night, and Silas stood at the top of the stairs listening. The man wouldn't give names, but the message was clear. More were coming. More would always come. They rode into town the next morning. Silas handed the bounty hunter over to the sheriff without ceremony, said he trespassed, said he threatened their lives. The sheriff asked no questions. Outside, Marin stood by the wagon, wind tugging at her coat. "We can't stay," she said. "Not much longer." Silas studied her. "Where would we go?" She looked east, then west, then down at her hands. "I don't know, but not here." He nodded. "When the time comes, I ride with you." She looked up at him then, eyes wide and stunned like someone who didn't know she could be chosen. He reached for her hand, held it. In that touch was everything unsaid. Grief and promise and the seed of something not yet named. That night she didn't sleep. Neither did he. The world was too quiet again. In the distance, wolves howled. Not mourning, not hunger. Warning, they left before dawn. No words, no farewell. Just a saddle creak, a packed bag, the quiet snort of horses bridled in fog. The land was still asleep, mist clinging low to the hollows, the cabin behind them a dark shape against a silver sky. Marin didn't look back. Silas did once, just once. They rode west, where the hills rose gradual and the trees grew dense. They kept to back trails, ghost paths carved by elk and time. Marin led more often than not, her senses keener, tuned to danger in ways Silas no longer questioned. She was all edge and instinct, moving like she belonged to the wild and not the world that wounded her. For 7 days no one followed, no riders, no shadows. They passed through a canyon where the rocks bled rust, and on the third night they made camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods that whispered like old women. It was there, beside the fire, that Marin finally said, "I want to stop running." Silas didn't answer right away. He added another log to the fire, watched the sparks leap like stars. "Then we stop," he said. Her eyes found his, steady and unreadable. "You don't owe me that." "No," he agreed, "but I still offer it." She looked away, jaw tight. "I was 13 when I first left home," she said. "My father sold my sister for 3 mules and a rifle. I hid in the woods 2 days before I ran. Been moving ever since." Silas listened. "Everywhere I went, someone tried to claim me, or fix me, or use me. You're the first man who never asked for anything." He looked into the fire. "Maybe I did, just didn't say it aloud." She was silent a moment. "What would you ask?" "That you stay," he said. The fire cracked between them, a soft hiss. She drew her knees to her chest. "I don't know how," she whispered. Silas didn't move closer, didn't reach for her. He just said, "You don't have to know, you just have to want it." And she did, that much was clear. It lived in her eyes, in the way she lingered near him now without flinching, in how her breath no longer hitched when his hand brushed hers. She was still cautious, still waiting for the earth to tilt, but the tilt had slowed. They found a place a week's ride farther, an abandoned line shack by a stream, half sunken but sound enough. Together they fixed the roof, cleared the debris, and built a life in pieces. Not quickly, not with ease, but steadily. She planted herbs behind the cabin. He shaped a new porch. They hunted together, split the meat, tanned the hides. When she smiled, it came slow, like something stretching in the sun after too long a sleep. When she kissed him, it was without trembling. One morning, as frost melted from the leaves, Marin stood in the doorway and said, "I think I'm not afraid anymore." Silas looked up from sharpening his blade. "Of what?" "Of being seen." He set the knife down, crossed to her. He touched her face, gentle, her scar, her cheek, her mouth. "You've always been worth seeing." She closed her eyes, leaned into his touch. And for the first time, no shadows stirred behind her. The past didn't vanish. Her scars didn't fade. But the weight of running eased. They lived quiet, rooted. Days filled with the hum of work, the hush of dusk, the slow miracle of healing in plain view. Some nights wolves still howled in the hills. Marin would lie awake and listen, not in fear but with recognition. She was still wild in some ways, still fierce, but she was no longer alone, and neither was he. She was the wild thing he should have feared, and the hope he forgot he needed. And now she was home.